The Presidential Employment Stimulus and the Presidential Youth Employment Interventions are initiatives that were introduced by the Presidency to deal with youth unemployment. Some estimates put youth unemployment at around 60%, and the scourge is often described as a ticking time bomb. So have the interventions made a dent in addressing the economic prospects of South African youngsters? Well, I'm joined by Waseem Carrim. He's the CEO at the National Youth Development Agency. Thank you very much, Waseem, for joining us. So just outline the Presidential Youth Employment Initiatives for us, when they came into effect, and what the results have been so far.
Yeah, thanks very much. Good afternoon to your viewers as well. So, of course, as you rightly say in your introduction, youth unemployment has been a major challenge for democratic South Africa. And I think the feeling amongst government, but also sectors of society, is it's something that can't be left to markets alone to deal with. Of course, we know South Africa's employment and unemployment outcomes are as a direct result of our economic performance and particularly a lack of economic growth over the last decade or so. But with that being said, there are initiatives which can be put in place to support young people and their prospects in the labor market. Yeah. Now, the youth employment intervention was designed prior to the pandemic, and we know that the pandemic in many ways accelerated the challenges that we face in South Africa. But really, its fundamental understanding is that young people can't be expected to wait for economic growth to happen. There are a lot of things that we can do here and now to be able to assist them. So both the interventions consist of a number of programs, but I'll just give you one as an example, is that we introduced the Basic Employment Education Initiative, where about 250,000 young people were placed annually for 3 years in 26,000 public schools across South Africa. It makes it one of the largest public employment programs, not just in the country, but around the world, but probably the fastest to reach that kind of scale. There's no company in the world that can immediately employ 250,000 young people, right? Now, that's not just employment for young people. It's not just work and improving their prospects and them earning at the national minimum wage. What school principals and teachers are saying to us is it's reducing the burden on them from an administration perspective, and it seems to be improving education outcomes. More than that, those young people take those salaries that they earn on a monthly basis, they spend it in local economies, benefiting local vendors, which improves the circulation of money. So those are just some examples. And at a more macro level, perhaps my last point is to say, over the last 8 quarters, we've seen 8 consecutive declines in youth unemployment. Of course, the figure is still high, but for the first time in the 25 to 34 age group, we are looking at under 40% unemployment. And if we were to continue on this trajectory, it means by the time we get to 2030, we could potentially see youth unemployment under 20%, putting us much closer to the rest of the world.
Yeah. So, Waseem, what about the quality of the jobs that or opportunities that are being created? We know with the expanded public works program, for example, that people get to do some work, maybe working on a road or whatever it may be, for 3 to 6 months. They get whatever income from that, and then they're out of work, and then they're back to square one and don't necessarily learn any major skills. What is the quality of the kind of opportunities that are being offered to youngsters such that they can actually graduate from where they are to actually being propelled into, whether it's the private sector or public sector, to something greater?
Definitely. And I think you raise a fundamental point, and what has always been a criticism of public employment programs, right? So I gave an example of the catalytic impact of the education program. Let me give you another, for example, right? Is that in the National Youth Service, for example, young people have been placed in early childhood development centers, right? Which is critical. I think we know that where young children under the age of 2 receive quality ECD, that improves their prospects for the rest of their life. So young people are trained as early childhood development educators. They work in ECD centers, they support these centers, many of whom are subsidized by the Department of Social Development. So they improve their skills and their capacity, and we know ECD is a growing sector. It's a sector which is attracting a lot of developmental funding, a lot of donor partner funding. But what a fundamental focus of the program has been for us is working on the transitions of young people from existing programs into other programs, right, into more sustainable employment. And this is looking at it from the perspective that when a young person enters a public employment program, we already aim to have them transitioning into the next phase of their opportunities. And where we really see a lot of opportunity is where young people can transition into self-employment opportunities. South Africa has a smaller informal market than the rest of Africa, than the rest of the world. And I think that is really where the opportunity lies to fundamentally address the unemployment question.
Yeah. Waseem, you seem somewhat distracted, but one last question for you. Do you think structurally and fundamentally that the problem that we have in South Africa is that there is no marriage between our educational institutions, whether it be secondary school right through to tertiary level, with what industry wants and demands of people who are coming out of school? And do you think more work needs to be done to create a better marriage in that regard?
So I think from a skills perspective, South Africa has invested heavily in skills development, whether it be at basic education level, whether it be at higher education level, whether it be through CETAs, the Secretary of Education Training Authorities. We have invested, right? But I think we need to come back to the economic growth question, right? Because skills which are not utilized are often lost. Huh? So I think sometimes we focus on the skills question very unilaterally, without considering the fact about how important work experience is to skills. Many of us would train theoretically at university or at college. The reason we are able to apply those skills is because we've been in a practical environment. Yeah, I think generally what we see is that 80% of learning takes place on the job. Yeah, and that brings us back to why these programs are so critical. Yeah, because often you hear young people say, we don't want any more certificates, we just want jobs. So marrying our skills development objectives with our work experience ones should lead us to see better outcomes, couple that with economic growth, and we could have fundamentally better answers to our unemployment question in the future.
Waseem, thank you very much. Great talking to you. That was Waseem Carrim. He's the CEO of the National Youth Development Agency.